now turn my focus to the big economic picture that we're talking about, and we're going to show you some data that we have put together at ET Now, which shows high frequency indicators. If you look at credit growth, you look at the growth of automobiles, electricity consumption over the last 6 months, and we've been talking about the 6-month theme. It's been 6 months since the lockdown, consistently on the show. It draws you a picture of a revival that took place, very sharp revival that took place in the months of June, July, and then has started to sort of waver in August and September. And this is the issue that we need to focus on. Joining me in the discussion on this evening is Mr. R. Gopalan, former Finance Secretary, M. Govinda Rao, former member of the PMEAC, as well as Dilip Chenoy, Secretary General of FICCI. Welcome to all of you, and thank you for speaking with us today. Mr. Rao, let me come to you first on your thoughts of what is the steadiness of our economic growth. We've been speaking consistently. We had Jahangir Aziz on the show also yesterday, talking about how the lack of a strong fiscal stimulus from the government has made our growth trajectory shaky, or our recovery shaky. Would you say that that is one clear reason?
Well, let me start by saying that the recovery that you saw in after the partial lifting of the lockdown was mainly due to the pent-up demand, and in some of the areas. And then of course you got into the constraints thereafter. Constraints. Number one, some of the sectors have not been opened at all. Travel, trade, and things like that. It'll take a year, possibly a couple of years before they come to come full steam. Then, in some cases, there is a problem of migrant labor, which has gone away, and then the capacity utilization continues to be less. People have been have a lot of precautionary motive, so they are not really spending much at this particular moment of time. They are keeping the reserve. Has been very little. There's been mainly in terms of
Mr. Rao, we have a poor line there.
The food grains,
Mr.
And I'm afraid I can't help it.
No, I know, sir. Let me give it a couple of minutes and then come back to you, and hopefully we can sort out your line. Let me go across to R. Gopalan just for his opening comments, and then I will return to you, Mr. Govinda Rao, because I really want to know how you assess the situation. Mr. R. Gopalan, let me come to you with your opening comments, really. Do you agree with this sort of diagnosis that we have to be concerned now if we are seeing a sort of shakiness in the growth trajectory in August and now in the month of September? We have to ask ourselves how we can ensure that we recover fully.
I find that that growth indicators are pretty tepid. Credit growth rate has not been of that high order, though it is 6.7% overall in the non-food credit sector. Manufacturing in the micro and medium, it is negative, and large, it is a very small increase. And beyond that, there's not much of a scope I am looking at for the credit growth at this point in time. First quarter growth results were very, very poor. Now, if you look at the NREGA absorption, I find that it has plateaued now after the initial run which took place as a result of migrant workers going back to the states. So obviously, they were also candidates for this, but then now that has now come down. Probably some reverse migration is taking place, and probably there is not much of a need for it because agricultural operations themselves are perhaps doing good. Exports continue to languish. Then imports have also, declined. While inflation has, as you know, is showing its head little high. But my only worry is that the haphazard restrictions on movements, thanks to the COVID cases shooting up here and there, that uncertainty is really affecting the supply chains as far as the economy goes. So that is one area which is really, not looking good. Our demand is, tapering. Our demand is tapering.
Yes.
Workplace mobility is has worsened. You will find the Google index, mobility index, and Apple driving index, they have increased, but workplace mobility has decreased. So we are getting conflicting signals on how the growth is taking place, but it is not a very clear picture. And as a result, I would tend to believe that supply shocks may in some sense, reduce the probability of growth in the second quarter and the third quarter going.
Yeah. I believe we have Mr. Rao back with us. Mr. Rao, we're going to try and speak to you again and possibly get some clarity. If I could also ask you about intermittent lockdown still being the culprit, because that has eased off. The central government has been at pains to tell states that please don't do this 2-3 day wala lockdown. It really messes things up, and that seems to have eased off. Is that still the problem?
There are many cities where you still have a lot of hotspots, and people are not really willing to move out and then sort of purchases and things like that. People have been extremely careful. There are selected lockdowns, and as I mentioned earlier, some of the sectors cannot be opened up at all, like the tourism or travel. These are the sectors which will take a long time to come back into this thing. And the immediately after the lockdown was partially lifted, you had economic growth coming back to some extent, mainly because of the pent-up demand, and particularly in automobile sectors and all that, because people now would not like to take public transport, they would like to have their own transport. But then, even if there is a lot of fiscal stimulus at this particular point of time, the demand for many of these fast-moving consumer goods is not going to increase dramatically. The best way forward is that the government should increase expenditure, particularly on infrastructure sectors, particularly capital expenditure. When you do that, of course, there is always a fiscal space problem, but I think massive disinvestment is the only way forward, where you can use that money for investing in roads, railways. The other thing is that the government also should try and monetize the land it has, particularly railways have a lot of land, monetize the land. Similarly, for defense expenditure, they can monetize a lot of land the defense department has. So eventually, there may be, I'm sure there will be, the government will come back with some additional stimulus, but it is not likely to be like most other countries where they have fiscal space, nor is it going to be like in 2009, because 2009, when the global financial crisis struck, you had 3 years of very good growth rate prior to that, and then you had a lot of fiscal space. You are not going to have that.
Yes.
So, but then even when the demand starts picking up, there is always this problem of migrant labor. They've just yet to come back to the cities. There is a lot of fear, because cities have become, many of the cities are continue to be hotspot, and then the coronavirus numbers are increasing by the day. Right. We still haven't been able to tame the curve. I don't think there will be very fast growth in the near term. Possibly it will, sort of second quarter, as Gopalan said, second quarter and even the third quarter.
Yes.
But depending upon...
Right. So in fact, S&P today has said that they look at growth normalizing maybe in the beginning of FY22, 2022. So let me come to Mr. Dilip Chenoy for the corporate perspective. In the middle of all of this, now we know the problems well enough. There is still a lack of demand. We're still waiting for fiscal stimulus, and we're consistently asking on this show, fiscal stimulus, what are we waiting for? There's enough of a strong case for round two. But what is the mood really in corporate India? What is there to incentivize private investments?
Well, I think there are two questions in that. The first is, what is the mood in corporate India? We recently actually did a very survey in terms of how do you see the time frame for Indian economy to be back to the normalcy. So one, which is very obvious because of the extended, COVID, everyone actually, when it began, everybody thought it was a 3 to 4 month, kind of phenomena. Then, we'll get back to normalcy. But now the time is extended. So, roughly about, as against about 50 odd % who felt that in June, who felt that it will take about 12 months for certain sectors to recover, it went on to about 62% saying that the economy will take about, more than 12 months to recover. But the other interesting fact was that, if you looked at the current capacity utilization, roughly about 56% of the companies were above 50%, only about 44% were below 50% capacity utilization. But when asked about the outlook, right, for the next 3 months, actually, 70% of the companies expected their capacity utilization to go up over 50%. So, that was what they talked about. And the best part was that, that everybody believed that the unlocking had a positive impact on the company's capacity utilization, companies' exports, whichever marginally it was. So the mood was quite upbeat. But there are 4 things actually which we believe, and in various forms they've been actually addressed by Mr. Govinda and Mr. Gopalan, is that the first thing we need to actually bring back is to demonstrate that, we're able to contain the mortality rates and the infection rates of COVID going forward, and bring back the confidence. Mr. Gopalan mentioned the mobility index and the office index, etc., declining. And that is primarily because there's a lack of confidence in going out and doing, the normal business, etc. And of course, as Mr. Govinda said, many sectors are closed. So, we need to be able to get the confidence to open up the sector. The third element is very interesting. We have to kickstart consumption. Whether it is consumption through spending in infrastructure, and most of the cash transfers, etc., that have been given to various segments of society have actually ended up in the bank. And the savings rate is kind of increasing. It is not going into consumption and not kickstarting the economy. So we need to actually say that give an incentive for consumption now, and it's not necessarily reduction of GST, but more importantly, many segments are still not consuming or not, the feared supply side issues are because of the lack of credit. So we need to actually get these 4 C's, which I'm talking about, whether it's containment, confidence, consumption, and credit, kind of a vicious cycle going, so that everybody is confident of going out and contributing to economic growth.
Absolutely. Mr. R. Gopalan, I want to bring to you the very basic question we're asking. Like I said, there is a very, very strong case for an increased fiscal stimulus. There is some chatter that there will be another round before the festive season kicks in, etc. Really, we don't know if that will happen or not. But in your view, what are we waiting for? Why this hesitation?
Well, Tamanna, this is a question which you have been raising to a large number of your panelists the last few days, and nobody is able to give you a proper answer. Now, probably people, there are ways, there are probably the government feels that, the credit to the GDP has increased very fast thanks to the stimulus we have given, whatever the fiscal deficit which we have gotten into, as well as the shrinking of the base effect, base of the nominal GDP. Then secondly, they're worried about the inflation. These are probably two factors which would prevent the policymakers to look into a big, fiscal stimulus at this point in time. But the question is that, unless you ensure that the fiscal the stimulus is there, now your economy has gone down so steeply down, bringing it up to normal levels is going to take that much of a lifting. Now that lifting can come about through your fiscal stimulus, both in mainly in infrastructure space where the already existing programs can be used for spending more money rather than inventing new schemes which will take 5-6 months for the government to clear them. Get into those infrastructure things, because the fiscal multiplier of infrastructure, Mr. Govinda would readily agree, is far higher in the Indian economy as compared to any other revenue expenditure fiscal multiplier. So use this as a vehicle to get this going. But when people see a lot of things happening on the ground in infrastructure, they will automatically slowly start gaining confidence in spending. Now, push in some money. Obviously, today you say that they are saving, but when all these things happen on the ground, infrastructure work happens on the ground, government works happen on the ground, obviously, the tendency to spend money because of the confidence gain will go up, and hopefully we would have reached some kind of a plateau as far as the COVID cases are concerned. Now, all these things should fall in place, and there's a risk which government should take. But without government taking the risk, the private sector is not that much interested in pushing up the investments, which is definitely a better vehicle. But since it is not happening, there is a need for government to enter into this and ensure that the depths to which we have plunged in economic growth, we are able to be lifted, in a very, very accelerated fashion, so that we don't lose the capacity which has been destroyed. It is not lost forever.
Absolutely, and that is where the focus needs to be. In fact, one of the sort of areas of promise is the rural sector, where some of the tailwinds are showing, middle India as they're calling it, and that particular sector is right now rocked by a controversy over the agri bills. We'll have to wait and see if this reform that the government claims will free up farmers actually yields better productivity, how much time it takes to set in, etc. Well, I want to thank all of you for joining us in the first leg of the discussion. We're going to